I'm Mr. MegaManFan, this is Genesis Does, and today we're talking about Mugen Senshi Valis, also known as Valis, the Phantasm Soldier. Now, if you're a fan of the Valis series, good news, everyone! The first three games in their original PC Engine versions are being ported to Nintendo Switch as the Valis Collection, and it's available on December 9th, 2021. So there seemed like no better time to talk about the first Valis game for Mega Drive and Sega Genesis, because it was released in both regions. Unfortunately, the localized version published by Renovation in North America has become exceedingly expensive, with loose copies going for $40 and complete in-box copies going for $130, which is why I honestly don't have a physical copy. The only one that I have for Genesis is Valis 3. The Mega Drive version is cheaper, but not necessarily a bargain. It's $21 loose and $48 complete. At first, I thought something was wrong with my ROM, given that the game was operating in absolute silence, and then it kicked into a soundtrack when this red-haired girl appeared, so I realized it was actually programmed that way. I believe some of the other console versions actually include voiceover, which we would have heard, but for the Mega Drive cartridge, they probably had to get rid of some of the extras just to make it fit into the limitations of the cart size. Understandable that they made that compromise, but they could have at least put some sort of background music in there where the voice acting would have been, instead of having it be completely and utterly silent until this girl showed up. The blue-haired one, who reminds me a little of a Sailor Moon character, is named Yuko Aso. She's apparently been tasked with saving 3 different worlds by virtue of her birthright. For some reason, she's been invested with the power to fight for both the physical and the spiritual realm, as well as the kingdom ruled by Valia, by wielding the magic sword known as Valis. In fact, the threat to Valia's kingdom is the demon lord Rogals, who ends up taking over the body of Yuko's classmate Reiko, the one with the red hair seen here. So this is a rather tragic tale if you follow it through to the end, because her classmate is the unwitting pawn in this battle between heaven and hell for the kingdom of Valia. Certainly a heady plot, right? And would be worthy of an anime, a manga, a TV movie, an OVA, a long-running series. If this was anything other than video games for PC Engine, Mega Drive, and so on, you could see this being a full-fledged franchise on its own, which is undoubtedly the reason that they have decided to resurrect this game and release a collection of the PC Engine versions on Nintendo Switch, which is also a good choice, seeing as they didn't get TurboGrafx 16 ports, so people who didn't get to play them before will get localized versions. Genesis owners were a little more lucky. Now, if we could stop the review right here, everything would be fantastic. Obscure Japanese game, very complex plot that you can get invested in, deeply rooted in the traditions of Japanese pop culture. It would be fantastic. Unfortunately, we have to talk about the actual game. The cutscenes at the beginning were definitely worthy of watching. This background music, once you get to the main title screen, is awesome, and there is plenty that you can find worthwhile in Mugen Senshi Valis, or Valis the Phantasm Soldier. But the gameplay isn't really one of those things that you can praise. In fact, Yuko's attacks with her sword, this magical mystical sword Valis, are so pathetic that a lot of the time I just ended up running to the right and trying to avoid combat. You know you done screwed up really, really badly when it's more preferable in a side-scrolling action game to avoid taking out enemies and not fight them. When you try, you do wimpy little hits. You have to hit enemies 3 or 4 times to do any damage. You invariably, almost every time, take damage when you're trying to do damage. You can see it right here. I'm hitting these things like 3 or 4 times just to take them out. It's not fun to do. I mean, there's got to be more to it, because when you hit the pause button, you get a menu that shows you can load in different options. And I've got HP and MP, but apparently the only way to acquire magic is to beat bosses. And as you'll see when it comes to the first boss, without any additional power-ups, that's a very difficult proposition. And it's not like a Mega Man game where you can pick one boss that's the easiest to beat when you're not powered up, acquire that boss's power, and then use it to beat the next robot master that is vulnerable to that power. If you could tackle Mugen Senshi Valis in that manner by picking which boss you wanted to play as stage first, then you might have a chance. But it's linear progression here. You don't get to pick and choose. You start at the beginning and you go forward in a straight line from there, which coincidentally is how the game progresses. You just run forward in a straight line. You don't really have to platform that much. You just run to the right. There doesn't appear to be any vertical scrolling or hidden items that you would traverse upward to look for, or gameplay areas you would descend downward into. It's just run to the right. You run to the right through the city, you run to the right through the subway platforms, you run to the right to reach the boss of the level. It is literally a left to right game. It's like taking the Super Mario Brothers idea of platforming, stripping out the platforms, and keeping the fact that it smoothly scrolls to the right. This is why gameplay design needed to change over time, because endlessly running to the right became a trope, so much to the point that people started parodying it and mocking it for always being the way video games were played. I find it even more ironic when you consider that manga is read right to left instead of left to right, and Japanese games invented the idea of playing things from left to right. So you would think it would have been the other way around, but no, that's what we've all gotten used to over time. I strongly suspect cheat codes would make this game better, or at least more tolerable, if you could power up her weapon or give her some additional spells that unlock special abilities, or if it just wasn't so monotonous and one-dimensional in its approach to how you complete it. Anything would be better than the way it is. I know the Valis series is beloved by some people, and I don't mean to be trashing it too much if it's your favorite, but this first entry must be better on MSX or PC Engine, because on this particular iteration, I just find it exceedingly tedious to the point it almost but not quite becomes unbearable. It's just barely good enough for me to continue all the way to the boss and see what that fight is like. And holy crap, when you get to the first boss, is it ever terrible. Let's start with the fact that you needlessly scroll 3 or 4 screens over to reach the boss, with nothing interfering or stopping you along the way. So what's the necessity of having this extra large room just to reach one room you can't leave? Poor design, unnecessary waste of time. Then he has an unblockable ground attack. The only thing I've figured out is jumping in the air when he does it, but you're going to land at some point, and if he's doing it right before or right when you land, you're going to take damage from it. So good luck with that. And you can try spamming your sword attack, but it's so weak, it doesn't seem to matter how many times you hit this boss, you're still going to run out of hit points long before he does. Also, a problem with this game design is that you don't have a hit meter for the boss. So you know how much damage you're taking and how close to death you are, but you have no idea how close to death he is. So you could be 1 hit away or 100 hits away. It doesn't matter, the game's not going to tell you. Maybe you could argue that this was not standard for game design, but it's 1991. I think games had figured out how to have hit bars for bosses. Just look at the Mega Man games I referenced earlier. Enough said. It could have been done. It wasn't done. So much of Mugen Senshi Valis feels like good ideas in theory, poor ideas in execution. If everything had been tightened up just a little bit, if they had added sound to the opening cutscenes before you meet your friend, if they had made the sword attacks more useful, less wimpy, if they had made the actual stages shorter or your character moved much faster, they wouldn't be so tedious to traverse your way through. If they had done any of these things, Valis would be a much better game. And since there are so many fans of this series, I can only assume it's a fault of the Mega Drive port and not necessarily the game itself. Valis is often cited for being innovative with its cutscenes and voiceover work, but you can't get that voiceover work on this cartridge version, so it must be on the CD versions if you have a CD-ROM system and can play it that way, which I'm going to recommend you do, because the Mega Drive version here isn't worth continuing. I got a game over and it said press start to continue. I opted not to. I'm Mr. MegaManFan. Thank you for watching Genesis Does. Liking the video, sharing it, or subscribing always helps the channel out. I'll see you next week with a new episode of Genesis Does.